The deeper thread running through all of this is not about labeling people as good or bad, but about recognizing patterns that repeatedly cost you stability, clarity, and energy when they go unchecked. Each type described reflects a different way people can interact without balance. Some take without giving back, some release without resolving, some test without respecting, some repeat without learning, some compare without connecting, and some deflect without owning. On their own, these behaviors can seem manageable, but over time, repetition turns them into structures that quietly shape your emotional environment. The difficult truth is that most of these patterns persist not because they are powerful, but because access is repeatedly restored. When someone consistently receives your time, attention, patience, or emotional labor without adjusting their behavior, the system stabilizes in its imbalance. Nothing has to change for it to continue working from their perspective. That is why awareness alone is not enough. Recognition without response becomes tolerance, and tolerance becomes reinforcement. At the center of all six patterns is a single principle. Reciprocity determines sustainability. Any relationship, personal, emotional, or social, requires some form of mutual awareness and adjustment. When that breaks down, the dynamic shifts from connection to consumption, from exchange to extraction, from growth to repetition. And the longer that structure remains unchanged, the more normal it begins to feel. Toxic people rarely begin by showing you who they really are because direct hostility would make their intentions too obvious. Instead, they often start with something subtle, something so small that it can be mistaken for a bad mood, a misunderstanding, or even harmless humor. This is why many people do not recognize the danger until they are already emotionally involved. What looks like an ordinary interaction is often a quiet test. They may interrupt you while you are speaking just to see whether you will reclaim your space or immediately shrink. They may make a sarcastic remark disguised as a joke and then carefully watch your face to see if you laugh along, become uncomfortable, or challenge them. They may delay responding to your message, cancel plans at the last moment, or give you a cold shift in tone without explanation, not because they are busy, but because they want to see how quickly you begin questioning yourself. These moments are not random. They are often calculated attempts to discover your emotional pressure points. The reason subtle testing works so well is because most people do not respond to the action itself. They respond to the confusion it creates. Instead of noticing the behavior, they start analyzing themselves. They wonder if they are being too sensitive. They ask themselves whether they misunderstood. They begin trying to maintain harmony by ignoring what felt wrong. That hesitation gives the toxic person valuable information. It tells them how much discomfort you are willing to tolerate in order to keep the connection. Every time you excuse behavior that unsettles you, they learn that your boundaries can be bent without immediate consequence. Every time you explain yourself too quickly, they learn that guilt can be used to control you. Every time you chase clarity from someone creating confusion, they learn that your need for peace can become their leverage. That is why the earliest moments matter more than most people realize. The first small test often predicts the larger pattern that follows. Toxic people do not always reveal themselves through one dramatic act. They often reveal themselves through repeated minor violations that slowly teach them how far they can go. The person who notices those small moments early sees what others only understand after damage has already been done. For many toxic people, testing is not really about the moment itself. It is about measuring control. The words they choose, the silence they create, and the boundaries they push are often less important than the reaction they can pull out of you. What they are truly trying to discover is whether they can influence your emotions without much effort. They want to know if a delayed reply can make you anxious, if a cold tone can make you overthink, or if a small criticism can make you seek their approval. To most people, these moments feel random, but to someone who thrives on control, they can function like emotional surveillance. Every response you give becomes information. If your mood changes because of their behavior, they begin to understand that your inner state can be touched from the outside. This is why control for a toxic person often feels more satisfying than connection. Genuine connection requires honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect, but control only requires access. If they can shift your emotional state, they feel powerful. If they can make you explain yourself when you did nothing wrong, they feel influential. If they can create tension and then watch you work to restore peace, they learn that your nervous system can be pulled into their orbit. The actual issue may be small, but the deeper reward is knowing they can affect you. Some toxic people do this consciously, while others do it so habitually that they no longer realize they are doing it. Either way, the pattern remains the same. Their tests are often designed to answer one silent question: can I move this person emotionally whenever I choose? The danger is that many people unknowingly participate in that dynamic. They believe they are defending themselves, fixing the relationship, or proving their intentions, when in reality they are demonstrating how responsive they are to manipulation. The more urgently someone reacts, the more clearly they reveal what can be used against them later. That is why emotional self-control becomes so important. The moment a toxic person realizes they cannot easily disturb your peace, the dynamic begins to change. When their usual tactics no longer create the reaction they expected, the sense of control they were seeking starts to disappear. What unsettles them most is not confrontation. It is realizing they no longer have easy access to your internal world. One of the most overlooked truths about toxic behavior is that your reactions can quietly teach people how to treat you. Every time someone crosses a line and you respond emotionally without addressing the behavior, a pattern begins to form. Toxic people pay attention to this more than most realize. They notice what hurts you, what makes you defensive, what makes you chase, and what makes you stay silent. Even if they never admit it, they are constantly learning from the way you respond. Your reaction becomes feedback. It tells them whether their behavior creates fear, guilt, confusion, or compliance. Over time, they begin to understand exactly which emotional buttons produce the response they want. For example, if someone dismisses your feelings and you immediately start explaining yourself, they may learn that invalidating you makes you work harder for understanding. If they pull away and you quickly reach out to repair the distance, they may learn that withdrawal makes you pursue them. If they say something disrespectful and you laugh it off to avoid tension, they may learn that your discomfort can be ignored without consequence. None of these moments seem significant by themselves, but repeated over time, they can become a kind of emotional conditioning. Without realizing it, many people train others to believe that their boundaries are flexible, their patience is endless, and their peace can be disrupted without cost. This does not mean your emotions are wrong. It means unexamined reactions can become instruction. Toxic people often do not need to control you through force because many people unknowingly hand them a map. That map is built from repeated emotional responses. It shows them where your insecurities live, where your fear of abandonment exists, and where your need for approval can be used. The more predictable your reactions become, the easier it is for someone manipulative to repeat the same behavior. They do not always continue because they enjoy the conflict itself. Sometimes they continue because your response has shown them that the behavior works. That is why awareness changes everything. When your reactions become intentional instead of automatic, the pattern starts to break. The moment someone can no longer predict how you will respond, they lose one of the clearest forms of access they once had. Many toxic dynamics survive not because the behavior is hidden, but because the reactions keep reinforcing the cycle. Once that reinforcement stops, the entire dynamic can begin to shift. Silence can be one of the most misunderstood forms of strength because many people have been taught that they must immediately defend themselves whenever someone challenges them. When a toxic person says something unfair, twists your words, or tries to provoke a reaction, the natural instinct is often to explain. Most people believe that if they can just say the right thing clearly enough, the other person will finally understand. The problem is that toxic people are often not searching for understanding in the first place. In many cases, they already understand exactly what they are doing. What they want is access to your emotional energy, and lengthy explanations can give them more than they could have taken through direct confrontation. Every time you rush to justify yourself, you reveal what matters most to you. You show what accusations affect you, what insecurities can be touched, and how quickly you feel the need to repair tension that you did not create. To a manipulative person, this can become valuable information. They may not even care about the explanation itself. What they care about is seeing how hard you are willing to work to regain approval or restore peace. The more you explain, the more material they have to distort later. They can interrupt your words, twist your meaning, or use your vulnerability as proof that you are unstable. What begins as an attempt to clear the air can slowly become a cycle where your honesty keeps giving them new tools. Silence changes that dynamic because it removes the reward. When someone expects defensiveness and instead receives calm restraint, it can interrupt the pattern they rely on. Silence does not always mean saying nothing forever. It means refusing to feed manipulation with unnecessary access. Sometimes a brief response carries more power than a long defense because it shows that your inner state does not need to be negotiated. When a toxic person cannot pull you into endless explanation, they lose the ability to control the conversation through your emotional urgency. They can only manipulate what you continue to hand them. This is why silence is not weakness when it is chosen consciously. It can be a form of emotional discipline. It communicates that not every accusation deserves your energy, and not every misunderstanding deserves your labor. Some people expect your words because they have learned that words can be turned against you. What often unsettles them most is meeting someone who understands that protecting peace sometimes requires saying far less than they expected. And if this is already making sense, take a moment to subscribe, because understanding human behavior can save you years of unnecessary damage. Small boundaries often reveal more about a person than major confrontations because they expose how someone responds when they are denied even a little access. Many people think boundaries have to be dramatic to matter, but in toxic dynamics, the smallest limits can uncover the deepest truths. A simple "I can't talk right now," a calm "that doesn't work for me," or a quiet refusal to engage in a disrespectful joke can reveal intentions faster than long conversations ever could. Toxic people often appear comfortable when they believe they have unrestricted emotional access. But the moment even a small boundary is introduced, their reaction can tell you exactly what kind of relationship they were expecting. Healthy people usually adjust when they see a reasonable limit. They may ask questions, seek clarity, or simply respect what you said. Toxic people often do something very different. They may become irritated by a boundary that should not feel threatening. They may accuse you of being distant, selfish, cold, or overly sensitive. They may suddenly act wounded to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. Sometimes they push harder immediately after a boundary is set, not because they did not hear it, but because they are testing whether your limit is real. In that moment, the boundary itself is not the issue. The issue is whether they still have the ability to move past what you clearly expressed. Their response often reveals whether they value your well-being or merely their access to you. This is why micro-boundaries can be more powerful than large declarations. They create small moments where someone must decide whether they see you as a person with limits or as someone whose limits can be negotiated. Many toxic people are skilled at appearing respectful when everything goes their way, but respect is easiest when no sacrifice is required. Real character becomes visible when access is restricted. A person who only treats you well when you are easy to manage is often showing you that the connection depends on convenience, not respect. The reason many people miss these signals is because they focus only on words. They listen to apologies, excuses, and promises while ignoring the reaction to the boundary itself. But behavior around a small limit often says more than hours of conversation. The smallest no can reveal whether someone wants a relationship with you or simply wants control over how available you remain. In many cases, the first small boundary is where the truth becomes impossible to hide. Confusion can become one of the most effective tools a toxic person uses because a confused mind is easier to influence than a clear one. When someone consistently leaves you unsure of where you stand, questioning what was said, or wondering whether you imagined something, it can slowly weaken your trust in your own judgment. Many people assume confusion in a relationship means poor communication, but sometimes confusion is not accidental at all. Sometimes it is carefully maintained because uncertainty keeps the other person emotionally off balance. A person who knows where they stand can make decisions. A person who feels mentally disoriented often stays stuck trying to understand. This can show up in subtle ways. Someone may say something hurtful and then later insist they never meant it that way. They may act affectionate one day and distant the next without explanation. They may promise change in one moment and repeat the same behavior shortly after. They may deny things they clearly said or accuse you of overreacting to something that genuinely felt wrong. Over time, this creates an exhausting internal loop. Instead of evaluating their behavior, you begin evaluating yourself. You replay conversations in your mind. You search for hidden meanings. You wonder if you are too sensitive, too demanding, or imagining problems that are not there. That shift is what makes confusion so powerful. Your attention moves away from their actions and turns inward against yourself. For some toxic people, this uncertainty creates advantage. When your mental energy is spent trying to decode them, you have less energy to protect yourself. When you are focused on getting clarity, they remain in control of when that clarity comes. They can offer reassurance just long enough to keep you engaged, then pull it away again when they want emotional leverage. The unpredictability can become addictive because moments of warmth feel more valuable after periods of distance. What feels like emotional inconsistency can slowly become a system that keeps you attached to the very person causing the instability. The most dangerous part is that prolonged confusion can make unhealthy behavior feel normal. You stop asking whether the dynamic is healthy and start asking how to make it feel stable. That is often where manipulation becomes deeply rooted. The moment someone begins trusting your uncertainty more than your own instincts, they gain influence without needing open control. Many toxic people do not need to dominate loudly because creating enough confusion can make someone hand over their clarity without realizing it. Emotional detachment changes the power dynamic because toxic people often rely on emotional access more than most people realize. Their influence usually does not come from physical force or obvious control. It comes from their ability to disturb your inner world. If they can make you anxious, guilty, defensive, or desperate, they can often shape your behavior without directly telling you what to do. Many people think manipulation only works through words, but in reality, it often works through emotional disruption. The moment someone can consistently control how you feel, they can often begin to control how you respond. That is why emotional detachment can feel so threatening to a toxic person. It removes the mechanism they depend on. Emotional detachment does not mean becoming cold or pretending not to care. It means creating enough internal distance that another person's behavior no longer immediately dictates your emotional state. You still notice what they say. You still recognize what they do. The difference is that you stop absorbing every action as if it must become your emotional burden. Instead of reacting instantly, you begin observing. Instead of defending yourself automatically, you become deliberate. Instead of chasing reassurance, you allow silence to reveal what words often hide. This shift can seem small from the outside, but psychologically, it changes everything. Toxic people often expect quick reactions because quick reactions confirm access. When the reaction disappears, the sense of control starts slipping. This is why calmness can feel more powerful than confrontation. A toxic person may know how to argue with anger because anger keeps the emotional connection alive. They may know how to handle tears because tears still signal attachment. But detachment creates uncertainty for them. When their usual tactics no longer produce the expected emotional response, they lose the ability to predict your behavior. That unpredictability can unsettle someone who once felt confident they understood your emotional patterns. The person who used to feel easy to influence suddenly becomes difficult to read. For many people, the hardest part is understanding that detachment is not indifference. It is self-protection. It is the decision to stop handing your nervous system to someone who has repeatedly shown they cannot be trusted with it. Once someone realizes they can no longer pull you into fear, guilt, or chaos on demand, the relationship no longer operates on the same terms. The emotional leverage that once gave them influence begins to disappear, and without that leverage, many toxic dynamics start losing the very energy that kept them alive. Predictability can become a hidden vulnerability because toxic people often study patterns more carefully than most people realize. They pay attention to what upsets you, what makes you forgive quickly, what makes you chase, and what makes you stay. Over time, they begin to recognize your emotional rhythm. They learn that if they become distant, you will reach out. If they become critical, you will defend yourself. If they withdraw affection, you will work harder to reconnect. Once someone can accurately predict your reactions, they no longer need to control every situation directly because they already know how you are likely to respond. Your consistency becomes something they can quietly use against you. This is why predictability can create danger in toxic relationships. It allows the other person to move through the dynamic with a sense of psychological certainty. They know which words create guilt. They know which behaviors trigger fear. They know how long to stay silent before your anxiety begins doing the work for them. In many cases, manipulation becomes easier not because the tactics are sophisticated, but because the responses are familiar. A person who can anticipate your next emotional move often feels one step ahead without needing to openly dominate the interaction. What appears to be emotional intuition may actually be repeated observation of your patterns. Unpredictability changes that balance because it interrupts the script they have become comfortable using. This does not mean becoming chaotic or playing games. It means becoming less automatic. When someone expects immediate access to your attention and you pause instead, the pattern shifts. When they expect you to explain yourself and you remain brief, the pattern shifts. When they expect you to chase after distance and you choose stillness, the pattern shifts. The goal is not to confuse people for power. The goal is to stop making your emotional responses so easy to manipulate. When your reactions become intentional rather than reflexive, the person who once felt they understood your every move suddenly loses certainty. That loss of certainty matters because many toxic people rely on emotional familiarity to maintain influence. They feel strongest when they know exactly how to move your inner world. The moment they can no longer predict what will affect you, their sense of control begins to weaken. They may push harder at first because unpredictability forces them into unfamiliar territory. What once felt like a reliable system no longer works the same way. And often, the safest position in a toxic dynamic is becoming someone whose peace can no longer be easily calculated. In the end, toxic people test you for one reason. They are trying to discover whether your peace belongs to you or whether it can be controlled by them. They watch your reactions, they study your boundaries, and they look for the places where emotion can override awareness. But the moment you understand that every small test is revealing their intentions, you stop seeing their behavior as personal and start seeing it as predictable. That is where your power returns. You no longer feel the need to explain every truth, defend every feeling, or chase every moment of distance. You begin responding with clarity instead of emotion, with boundaries instead of fear, and with self-control instead of survival. And that is what changes everything. Because toxic people can only keep power over the version of you that still reacts automatically. The moment you become calm enough to see the game without stepping into it, you become someone they can no longer easily manipulate. And once a toxic person realizes they can no longer control your inner world, they are forced to face the one thing they never expected, a person they cannot move.